Welcome all to the Brain Health and Wellness Initiative series. Tonight, our presenter is Leanne Stuver, and she is going to be talking about how to build a resilient brain. My name is Hannah Doles, and along with my colleague, Nicole Herbert Hale, we provide care navigation in the JFSA Dementia Care Navigation Program. Our program establishes an empowering environment to help improve the quality of life of those who have dementia or at risk of developing dementia, all while helping family caregivers reduce the stress and burden that often occurs while caregiving. At JFSA, we understand the importance in working with our clients' strengths and applying a person-centered approach to care, which extends throughout our multidisciplinary team of geriatricians, nurses, social workers, and geriatric psychiatrists. Nicole and I meet our clients where they are at and develop individualized care plans that help produce solutions to presenting problems. From linking persons with dementia and their families with community resources to following them with their medical management, we are their point of contact for guidance as well as a listening ear. We consider the intersectionality of one's life when creating interventions that adhere to their biopsychosocial needs and experiences. A few items tonight before we begin the webinar. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and that's how we will take questions at the end of Leanne's presentation. So feel free to type your questions into that box, and please, if you don't mind, try not to use the chat function. We will be offering CE credits for this presentation today. So after the presentation, you will receive a link to a survey. So it will take about 30 days from the date of your application, which takes place after you complete the survey, to issue your credit. And we will email you the survey to the email address you provided during registration for this webinar, and it needs to be the same one. So if you're unsure about which one you used to register today, feel free to give me a call or email us just to make sure you get the survey at the end of the presentation, which should come sometime tomorrow or Monday. A little bit about our presenter today. Leanne Stuver is a registered nurse with an extensive background in health education. She worked as a hospital nurse for 10 years before earning her master's degree in education. She has over 20 years experience in planning and implementation of adult education programs at Menora Park, where she served as the director of lifelong learning. Leanne has been involved in numerous speaking engagements with JFSA, including teaching savvy caregiver workshops and facilitating caregiver support groups. She is currently the director of lifelong learning at the Virtual Brain Health Center and teaches community education classes about the importance of lifelong learning and brain health. She is passionate about educating the community in practical ways they can learn to support their health and wellness. Thank you, Leanne, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Hannah, and welcome everyone. It's so nice to have you all here this evening. Tonight, we are going to talk about resilience and why we need our brains to be resilient so that we can survive in this crazy world that we live in. So let's talk about the meaning, the definition of resilience. So it is being able to successfully navigate each day of your life. The ability to adapt to difficult situations and the ability to harness your inner strength. A simpler way would be to have a go with the flow mentality, or to be able to bend with the wind, or even bounce back from adversity. That's the kind of thing we're talking about as far as what does resilience mean. Some of you may think that you are resilient. Some of you may think you're not resilient. It's not necessarily something that we're born with, but it is a learnable skill. And we're going to talk about how to learn to be more resilient as the evening goes on. Now, being resilient doesn't mean that you don't ever face any challenges in life. It's actually because you face challenges and have to adapt and change, that is what makes you resilient. So you often hear, I'm going to bounce back stronger because of this hardship. The road to resilience often involves considerable emotional distress. That is what builds resilience, and that's what teaches us what we have to do in future situations to succeed. Resilience is actually a skill that we can learn, and the way we learn it is by changing our brain. So resilience begins in our brain. It is actually a behavior of a mature, well-functioning brain. In other words, if all the areas of our brain work well together, it is easier for us to learn to build this resiliency. And a few areas of the brain that I'm going to talk about several times tonight and use this picture several times tonight are the prefrontal cortex, which is up here behind your forehead in the front part of your brain. That's the area of our brain that is, it's called executive functioning. You may have heard that term, that as we get older, our executive functions are challenged a little bit more. That's our planning, our judgment, our decision making. But that's what goes on in the front part of our brain, in the prefrontal cortex. This area of our brain also regulates the function of our body and our nervous system. So our nervous system is a big key to building resilience. If any of you have ever been at one of my presentations, when I talk about stress, we talk about the two sides of our nervous system. We have the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight response. That is the part of our nervous system that's activated when we are under stress, whether it's chronic stress or acute stress. So if you wake up in the middle of the night to your fire alarm, your smoke detector going off, your sympathetic nervous system jumps into life and helps you to see better in the dark, to move quickly. It energizes your muscles. Your heart beats faster. You breathe faster. That's that sympathetic part of your nervous system. The parasympathetic part of your nervous system is what they call the rest and digest response. That's when you're calm, when you can have food move through your digestive system with no problem. You breathe slower, your heart rate slows down. Obviously, when you're stressed, you're in that sympathetic mode. And the parasympathetic mode is where you want to be for stress reduction. And that's also where resilience can flourish. So if you're stressed out and in that fight or flight response all the time, your brain doesn't have the chance to learn to be resilient. So kind of figuring out how to pay attention to your stress levels is real important in this whole idea of resiliency and our brain as well. Now, there's another part of the brain that was shown on this picture that is also real important. It's the amygdala. It's that little end there that is dark blue with the arrow pointing toward it. The amygdala is kind of the protective mechanism of our brain. It processes all of the threatening stimuli that we come in contact with. It is always on alert for danger. That is the job of the amygdala to be watching for danger and try to protect us from it. The hippocampus is nearby. That's the lighter blue area. And that is really tied into our memories. So The hippocampus is really where all of our memory storage begins. And it's so close to the amygdala so that we oftentimes remember those emotional things that happen to us better than mundane, boring things. It could be good emotions or bad emotions. But if you think about it, as far as when we're fearful of something, we remember that we're fearful of that. It's a protective mechanism. So if we were burned by a flame, our brain remembers that that flame is hot and it hurts, and it protects us from exposing ourselves to that. Now, the idea of having a resilient brain means that our prefrontal cortex controls our amygdala from getting overactive and sending us into this major fear response. So it kind of keeps us on an even keel. So we really want our prefrontal cortex, that front part of your brain, to be trained to help us be resilient. Now, how does that training go about? Well, the good news for all of our brains, no matter what age we are, is we have something that's called neuroplasticity. What that means is our brain can change and adapt by building new neural connections. So that picture that you're looking at is a picture of the neurons in our brain. And they have all these branches called dendrites, and they connect to each other and communicate. And when they build those connections, when we build new connections, our brain is learning new things. So when we learn new things, we build new connections, or maybe we strengthen existing ones. So maybe if there's something that we do once in a while, it's a weaker connection, but if we practice it, those connections get stronger. And it's that neuroplasticity that really helps us out in this building of this resiliency in our brain and our body. Anytime we take in a new piece of information from our environment, we can change and adapt those neural connections in our brain. And it happens throughout our lifetime. They used to think that once you got past adolescence, you never grew new brain cells, or you couldn't change any of those connections. And with modern medical technology of being able to see these neurons, they now know that's not true. We can build new connections and new neurons in certain parts of our brain throughout our entire lifespan. It never stops. So our brain never stops changing and adapting. So don't let anyone ever tell you you're too old, or don't ever tell yourself, I am too old to learn something new, because that is absolutely not true. It may be a little harder work as we get older to break some old habits, but it's not impossible. So building this neuroplasticity, especially in our prefrontal cortex, helps build our brain's resilience. So it is never too late to develop a resilient brain. We can choose to learn skills that teach our brain to be more resilient. Our brain's functioning is in our hands. We can make that choice to have changes occur in our brain. It takes practice, and it also takes awareness. So being aware of when you struggle with that resiliency factor. And I'm going to give you some tips that we're going to be able to put into practical use to think about it. So let's think of the first one. So the first tip is to view those difficulties that you encounter in life as a challenge rather than a roadblock. This is something that you may have to change your internal self-talk. So instead of being negative about a situation, you try to turn around and make it into a positive. So to flip that negative thinking and set a goal, outline steps, put a plan into motion of what you're going to do about it. Your prefrontal cortex loves to plan and loves to be in charge. So when we give it the opportunity, instead of just sitting down and saying, oh, woe is me, there's nothing I can do about this situation, instead say, oh, this is an opportunity. I can train my prefrontal cortex to do something about this. And then the next time I run into a challenge, it will be easier. Now, it's challenging when you first start doing this, because a lot of us are in the habit of being a negative Nelly and thinking, oh, woe is me. Be aware that if you're one of those people, that you do it, and start to change that self-talk and that self-thinking, and set it up as a challenge that you can do something about it to help alleviate it. You may not fix it, but you can start taking steps to work on it. When we're working on something that's a challenge, we have to be careful how we look at it. So we want to identify the right problem. We want to focus on those things that we can absolutely do something about. So there are a lot of things that happen to us that we are powerless to change. So if we would get a diagnosis of cancer, so to speak, there is very little we can do within ourselves to change that. However, we can make choices of how to handle that situation to change the reality. So you have to identify what you can actually do something about. Maybe you make a list of the possible solutions that you could use to face whatever that challenge would be. And you have to be willing to be flexible and experimental. That is a huge component of resiliency. People who are not flexible and who are not experimental are usually not very resilient. They are set in their ways, they are stuck in their habits. And in order to be resilient and to fight back, bounce back, you need to be willing to try different things. And if one thing doesn't work, then try something else. Your brain loves to try new things. Another thing when we're looking at these problems that we might run into is sometimes it helps to anticipate what kind of problems or what kind of changes we might run into, and to plan ahead for those difficulties. Now, this does not mean I want you to be pessimistic and expect the worst. I don't want that. I don't want pessimism, but I want realistic optimism. I want you to be prepared. So we'll stay with this cancer thing because it works. If you get a diagnosis of cancer and you're going to have chemotherapy, you know the possible side effects that you might have to face, and you can anticipate how you're going to handle them if you get them. If you don't, great, but you had a plan in place. So just being prepared for things that could happen in a certain situation can help us to be more resilient because they don't take us by surprise. We're more prepared. We've thought through some options in advance. So anticipating difficulties or challenges is not pessimism in itself, but you're planning for difficulties and to help yourself work through those. Another thing that a lot of us have to really work at is to ask for help or assistance. A lot of times we cannot be super resilient all by ourselves. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Resilient people have the wisdom to know when they need help and the strength to ask for it. So asking for help is not a bad thing. That makes you more resilient. You need a ride somewhere. You need help cleaning your house. You need whatever it is, you ask somebody for it. If the first person you ask to help can't help, then ask somebody else. But knowing when you need to ask for help is crucial to building resiliency. The other thing that we also need to do is we need to learn from our past experiences. So we all have faced a myriad of challenges during our life. Some of them we can probably look back and say, oh, I handled that really well. I'm proud of myself. Most of the time, we probably look back and say, oh, wow, I really did not handle that very well, and I need to do it differently in the future. That's okay. Think about how you have handled these challenges in the past. If over and over again, you have tried certain things and they never work, then stop trying them, because that technique does not work for you. Focus on strategies that were successful for you in the past, whatever that would be. Maybe talking it over with a friend, maybe writing it down on a journal, maybe making a pros and cons list. Whatever helps you deal with it or make that decision or planning, use those strengths that have worked for you in the past, and don't dwell on the things that didn't work well for you. Trying to remain positive and hopeful is also a very important thing. Now, I realize if you have a lot of stressors going on at the same time, which that often happens. How many of us just have one single thing go wrong at a time? Not very often. Usually they come in bunches and you wonder, why do they all come at the same time? But if we can remain hopeful and positive that we're going to work through these challenges, it can really help. It keeps our amygdala calmed down. It lets our prefrontal cortex function well for us and protect us and help us work through it. We can't change the past, so there's no sense dwelling on it, but we can find those small successes that we have each and every day to give ourselves a pat on the back and encourage us to keep going. So any way that you can keep those positive outlooks and remaining hopeful, even through the most difficult situations, or find someone that can help you do that. If you're having trouble doing it yourself, ask for help to help keep those positive thoughts. It will help. It will also help keep that sympathetic, that stress side of your nervous system calm down, and that helps as well. When we get ourselves into a panic and think of all the negatives, it just dampens down what our brain is able to do for us and to keep us functioning and thinking clearly. We also need to keep that attitude of gratitude in the front of our mind, no pun intended, with the prefrontal cortex. But it's really shown in the research that people who are grateful, even for the smallest things in their lives, have a better chance of building this resiliency in their brain and their body. So maybe it's a gratitude journal that you keep, whether it's every day or maybe once a week, saying thank you to people who help you and acknowledging that you are grateful for their help. Maybe it's prayer. A lot of people show their gratitude in their prayer practice for themselves. Paying it forward. This is one of my favorites. If we all would just try to do something nice or thoughtful for somebody else once a day, the world would be such a better place. It makes someone else feel good. It makes you feel good. All of these positive emotions, anything we can do to support these positive emotions that keep our brain calm and our stress levels calm, that is what helps our brain build those resiliency techniques that it needs. I've mentioned stress several times. We all need to recognize when we are stressed. So think about it for a minute. How does your body show that you're stressed? Do you clench your jaw? Do you get a headache? Does your stomach get upset? Do you get diarrhea? Do you get constipated? Do you get hungry? What symptoms does your body display when you are stressed out? Maybe you sweat. Maybe your mouth gets dry. We all have different ways that we know when we're stressed, that we feel it. And we need to learn stress reduction techniques that work for us. So what might work for me might not work for you. And there's a whole plethora of stress reduction techniques. Many people like to exercise. Maybe it's go for a walk, go for a swim. Maybe it's go to a yoga class, play racquetball, whatever it is. Exercise can help alleviate stress. Those hormones, endorphins that our body releases during exercise help reduce that stress cycle that goes on in our body. Maybe it's talking with friends. Maybe you have a friend you call when you feel stressed, or you get together for coffee. Some people like to take a nap or a bath. That helps calm them down and relieve their stress level. Others like to go out in nature, maybe take a hike or walk through the botanical gardens or the arboretum, whatever the case may be. Nature can be a great way to alleviate stress. Some of you might like to listen to music. That's another great way that we can calm our brain down and refocus and decrease that stress level. Meditation is another great way. Might be guided, might be listening to something on an app or on the computer, playing with your pets. That's another great way to alleviate stress. A cat, a dog, whatever kind of pet that you have. You don't take your stress out on your pets most of the time, and they love you even if you're stressed out. So pets are another great way to alleviate that stress. But again, the important part of this is to be aware and to recognize when you are stressed. Because when you have that stress response going on, your brain cannot be resilient for you. And you need your brain to be resilient. If our brain can't be resilient, we would never get through any of the struggles that we have. We would just shut down and not be able to go on with our lives and not be there for those that love us. So we need our brain to be resilient. Now, we came up with this infographic at the Virtual Brain Health Center that we say that brain care is self-care. Depending on the device that you're watching this on, I realize it might be a little bit small. I'm going to go through each of the areas, but please know that on our website, this is available as a free download if you're interested in looking at it or printing it out or saving it on your computer. So it's virtualbrainhealthcenter.com. And this is one of the handouts on the handout page that you can download for free if you're interested in having it to refer to. But we basically used brain care, and we used the first letters of those, of the letters that they spelled out to tell what's important when we're taking care of our brain. So the first one is balance. So for B is balance. It's important to take brain breaks during the day and prioritize that time to unwind so that your brain can de-stress and be ready for that prefrontal cortex to work for you when you need to plan and function. R is rest. Rest is very important for our brain. Experts recommend that we get 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Our brain is very busy when we sleep, not only with dreams, it has a cleaning mechanism. So when we are in deep sleep, there's cleaning going on in our brain that is vital. Think about a night when you've had a bad night's sleep. Does your brain work as well for you the next day? I know mine does not. That's because a lot of that excess stuff didn't get cleaned out in the night and your brain can't work effectively. So sleep is very important to build resiliency in our brain. A, an attitude of gratitude and practice it daily. We already talked about that, of ways you can be grateful and show gratitude. I is intellectual engagement. So always look for something new and challenging for your brain to do. That is what your brain is meant to do. It wants to learn new things. Hopefully you learned a few new things tonight, whether it's about the nervous system or about where those parts of the brain are. Hopefully you've learned a few new things tonight that have challenged your brain and given you some of that intellectual stimulation. N is nourish. Your brain needs you to eat and hydrate to fuel the mind. So you need to eat brain healthy foods and to make sure you stay hydrated. So we covered brain. So now let's cover care. Connect. We need to connect with others. It can be virtual like we are tonight. It can be in person. It can be email, text, phone calls, whatever, but you need to have conversations with other people. It's good for our overall well-being. It's good for our brain because we have to think. When you have a conversation with someone else, your brain works very hard. It has to listen, it has to process, it has to think about what you're going to say back, and then it has to give it out. So your brain is always working. Conversations are wonderful for our brain. The second A is aspire. Aspire to a brain healthy lifestyle. Some of you may have been in a class I did about SMART goals, helping you write goals to achieve brain health and wellness. But we all need to put our brain in the forefront of our health because our brain controls everything. And the healthier our brain is, the more it will protect us from any incidences we might have, whether it's a disease that affects our brain, whether it's an injury to our brain. The healthier our brain is to begin with, then we have some reserve, some cognitive reserve to protect us. This brain care idea is a journey. So that's why we laid it out as this kind of road. You don't just snap your fingers and it happens. It's daily practice. We have to think about taking care of our brain, what we need to do to keep it healthy, keeping those ideas of resiliency in mind of what we want our brain to do for us. And the last one is exercise. So we want to not only exercise our brain, whether it's through conversations or challenging situations or learning, but we also want to have some physical activity, because when our blood is pumping through our body, because we're moving, it's going to our brain. So about 25% of every heartbeat, the blood, 25% of the blood goes straight to your brain. So your body is designed to prioritize your brain. And the more you move, the more blood that goes through your brain and the healthier it becomes. The more nutrients it gets, the more oxygen it gets, and the better your brain will work for you. And the easier it will be to train it to do all these things we talked about, to be positive, to be grateful, and to be resilient. So when we practice these things every day, or most days, I know there's days that it doesn't work in, but we really need to think about it just like we think about exercising our body. We often plan that. We plan our physical exercise. We need to plan our brain care as well, because we really want to take care of our brain so that our brain takes care of us. So in wrapping up, a few comments that I want to have is the three most important things. Try to have a positive outlook when facing challenges. I know that's hard, but you want to, instead of saying I can't, you want to say I can, or I can try. You want to try to flip that negative thinking. I want you to focus on the situations or the parts of the situation that you can actually change, not the ones that you can't do anything about. And remember to be flexible and experimental and try different things. And most importantly, don't be afraid to ask for assistance, whether it's calling a friend, calling a neighbor, calling a relative, going to a support group, calling JFSA, whatever it is. Don't be afraid to ask for assistance when there's a challenging situation that you just can't seem to get a handle on of what to do. Now, I always like to give you a few resources that you can read more about the topics that I talk about. When you get the copy of the PowerPoint, you will have these links, so don't try to write them down now. You'll get them when you fill out the survey. You'll get a copy of the slides. But I gave you several resources. Train Your Brain to Build Resilience. That was from the mindful.org website. Debbie Hampton is another really good writer who writes a lot about different aspects of the brain, and she has a great article on the neuroscience of building a resilient brain. So if you want to read more about those different areas of the brain and what they do to build resilience, that's great. And I had the opportunity to be interviewed by a magazine about resilience and listing 5 things that I thought everybody could do to become more resilient. And that article is also there. It's also posted on our website, but it just kind of gives some of my real life situations that have been challenging and how I dealt with those and who some of my role models were as far as building resilience. So sometimes it's good to read some of these other resources, but you can also Google, resiliency in the brain, and you will get additional suggestions. There's lots of things out there. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Please put them in the Q&A if there is something that I didn't clarify or you have more questions about, or there's some situation that you want to share or a great resource for assistance. Please feel free to put any of those in.
Thank you very much, Leanne.
Yeah. It's not always easy.
Would you recommend seeing a mental health counselor to help with strategies with resilience?
Yeah, I think that is definitely a great option, especially if you have tried things on your own and haven't been successful. That is a way that you're asking for help, whether it's a counselor, a psychiatrist. We all have different levels of how our brain works for us hormonally, and sometimes just talking to an actual professional who can help assess that a little better. Depression is very common, especially throughout the pandemic. A lot more depression is being diagnosed. And so sometimes getting help with maybe a depression diagnosis by possibly if you would need medication can then help you switch gears and figure out how to help yourself. Or the counselors may have a lot better suggestions than I do. They probably have a much longer list of suggestions of ways that they help people help themselves. So yes, I think seeking assistance from support groups, therapists, mental health professionals is a perfectly acceptable way to help build your resilience. That's asking for help. It's a good way to go.
Thank you. Another one just came in. My good friend is very religious, and prayer has helped her throughout the years until now. She is having personal health problems, and there is a strain between her and her son, daughter-in-law. She also has stress caring for her 88-year-old mother. Do you have suggestions, especially for people who are very Bible-based, very religious, but at present turning to prayer has not been helpful?
Yeah, there's an example of a lot of different stressors that are all coming at once. And perhaps if it had been just one, prayer would have still helped. I think sometimes individually, and I can't speak to whether your family member is connected to a church or a synagogue, but perhaps talking to somebody in the ministry wherever they belong or are affiliated with would be helpful. Oftentimes, clergy can be a good sounding board. Maybe if the individual prayers are not sufficing and they're very religious, perhaps a meeting with a person from the church would be helpful, whether it's if it's not the actual leader of the church, maybe there's a group at the church that offers support. But if that seems to have been things that have helped in the past, probably staying in that religious realm would still be helpful, but maybe finding out who else in their church or synagogue they could maybe reach out to, or you could reach out to and ask them to reach out to your family member for a conversation or offering to help might be a good idea.
Yes, great idea. Can diet changes reflect stress and also improve resilience?
Yes. Diet can be a whole nother class onto itself. And I know that Dr. Grossman and Dr. O'Toole often bring up the whole idea of a diet for brain health. And it's probably next to physical activity, diet would be the next thing that really has been researched a lot and has shown to make a huge difference on our brain health. It's also one of the hardest things to do because we have so many bad food choices in our Western culture. Our normal American diet is called the SAD diet, the standard American diet. It's SAD for a reason. Think about it. When you're stressed, what do you crave? I'll use me as an example. I crave carbs, potato chips, sweets, all that kind of stuff, kind of that comfort food thought. That's the worst thing to eat when you're stressed. We should be thinking whole food, clean kind of eating when we want our brain does not function well with a lot of sugar. It bogs it down. So if we would be eating fresh fruits and vegetables, a lot of water, a lot of people turn to alcohol when they're stressed. Alcohol doesn't make your brain work really well. So be mindful of that. When you are feeling stressed, try to pick something healthy to eat, something fresh, something whole food, not processed. So whether it's a handful of blueberries or an apple or an orange or a cucumber, whatever, if it's a real food, or even just a glass of water, go drink a glass of water, put some fruit in it, put some cucumber water, whatever the case may be. The healthier you can get your diet, the better your brain will work. And I think a lot of times, and I'm guilty of it as well, you fall into that trap of your body and your brain seem to tell you that they want that junk food. So you go with it because that's what you've always done. That's your go-to, but it doesn't always help. It sometimes makes it worse. So again, this is something else to try to be flexible, change it up, go the opposite direction, go have a banana instead of that bowl of chips. See if it makes a difference. Your brain will thank you because your brain likes to run on that real food, not all those chemicals and not all those not real carbohydrates. They like the carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables. But yes, your diet can make a huge difference in all areas of your brain health. And like I said, that we could be here for 2 hours talking about brain food and what's good for your brain, but just decrease processed foods, anything that comes in a box or a package, increase those whole foods. You don't have to totally change your diet. Add in the good things.
Mhm.
Start adding in one good thing a meal, one good thing 3 times a day, whatever the case may be. And then the bad things will start to drop off. And then you can see, does your brain start working better for you? I think you'll notice that it does.
Mhm. Thank you. I am a caregiver. What are some strategies I can use since I have ongoing stress with my loved one?
Yeah. You know, I think that asking for help is the first one.
Mhm.
So as a caregiver, you are often 24/7 with the person that you're caregiving. And your brain very rarely gets that break that it needs. So you may need to ask for help. So JFSA has a lot of resources for caregivers. Uh, they have a support group, they have the caregiver classes that they offer to help you learn some additional techniques. But you definitely need some time for yourself. So it may be hiring somebody to come in and spend some time with your loved one so you can have that time for yourself. Or maybe asking a friend or a family member to come and spell you off, just to give you that break, that time to relax, to de-stress, to do something for yourself, not to go to the grocery store or clean the house, but to actually do something that is self-care, that gives your brain that little bit of stress relief so that it works well for you. So I guess the first thing I would say is know to ask for help and know that you need to figure out how to have some time for yourself, and don't feel guilty about it, because you need to take care of your brain and your body so that you can be the best caregiver you can be for your family member. So prioritize that me time for you so that you can be a better caregiver.
Thank you. Very good points there. It's like you never are out of that. You're constantly in it.
Yes.
So,
Yes, and you need to take those small breaks however you can get them.
mhm, mhm. You mentioned having role models, Leanne. And what can you tell us a little bit about that and who you look to?
Yeah, when I did the interview, I got the questions in advance, and I had time to think about it before I answered the questions. And I realized that I have always seemed to be resilient. So I tried to think back. I mean, I drive my husband crazy because I can find the silver lining in any bad situation. I can always find some positive out of the worst situation, and it drives him absolutely insane because he is not that way. And so it made me think about how I got that way. And I think it really was women in my life. Both of my grandmothers were very independent women for the age that they grew up in. And my mom was she really wore the pants in our family, even though she wasn't the primary breadwinner. And it didn't matter what came up in our family or what challenges there were. I never remember my grandmothers being down in the dumps about it, or my mother. They just rolled with the punches. And so I guess I kind of learned from them. I didn't know any different. I didn't call it resiliency back then. But when I looked back and reflected, it was something that I learned from them. And unfortunately, if you don't have those positive situations in your family or friends, you could be the opposite. So you could learn the doom and gloom, which is definitely passed down in my husband's side of the family. So again, being mindful of that, being aware of how the people around you handle those same kind of situations. and trying to search out somebody. You probably all know someone that never seems to complain about anything, or like me, can turn something around. Well, pick their brain. How do they learn to do that? Maybe make them your sounding board and have them help you figure out how to make that little mental flip in your mind to build that resiliency within yourself. So, it's really those women that I never gave a lot of thought to till I had to write this down. But it kind of was an epiphany for me that, yeah, they really, I learned a lot from them. So,
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Leanne.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you
thank
all
you.
for coming tonight. And that was, thank you for that presentation, Leanne.
You're
A lot
welcome.
to take away from that. So again, thank you all for coming tonight. Just to go a little bit over our program at JFSA, Nicole and I are care navigators, and we work with clients in the community that have a dementia diagnosis and their family caregivers. So if you have any questions about our program, our contact info is below, and we'd be happy to talk with you about how we assist families, figure out how to deal with challenging issues that come with the disease. We do have two geriatricians that work with us, Dr. Elizabeth O'Toole and Dr. Constance Magulius. They both come to us at our Allison's Place clinic that is located in our building on Chagrin. And we do help those if it is difficult for them to get out of the home. We will go to them in their home as well. So we can discuss that if you have questions. Also on our team is Frank Petrelli. He's our general psychologist, and he assists our clients with their neurological testing. And then Pam Lynch, she is with us and our facilitator for our Caregiving with Confidence workshops. Just in summary of our resources, we do offer ongoing Caregiving with Confidence workshops, and we will be offering those later in April, and we do have spots available. So if you or a family member would be interested in attending, and if you are a caregiver with someone with dementia, we highly recommend this workshop. We also have a support group. So an example of how to build resiliency, you can attend our support group, which we offer the second and fourth Mondays of the month at 1:30. It is on Zoom as well. We do have home care services, home delivered meals, cleaning services. So we do have a lot of those types of programs at JFSA, and our ongoing brain health and wellness initiative series. Next month, Dr. Elizabeth O'Toole will be with us on April 27th at 6:30, and we'll be talking about empowering healthcare decision-making in serious progressive diseases like Alzheimer's. So again, if you have any questions for Nicole or myself, please feel free to call or email us, and we'd be happy to talk with you further about any of our programs. Thank you all for attending tonight, and thank you, Leanne, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.